basis. Now, we know that the UK is one of the richest countries in the world, but it's one of the most unequal. And even the Financial Times has said that if Scotland was independent, it would continue to be one of the richest countries in the world. So the question is not, can we afford it? It comes back down to the question of the redistribution of wealth. And the question is, will the UK redistribute wealth to the poorer parts of the country, to the poorer parts of society, in order to better the standard of living of working people? Well, the answer is no to that, because otherwise it would have happened already. So the next question is, well, would Scotland do that? Why is there any more likelihood of that happening now? For trade unionists, for people in the Labour movement, for people in the Radical Independence campaign, everything comes down to grassroots empowerment. It all comes down to whether or not people from the bottom can change the top of society. No party in our current system is going to do that. Not the Labour Party, not the Tories, the Lib Dems or the SNP. We're not going to just wake up one day and start redistributing wealth. But what the referendum has done is empower people. There's meetings all across the country every single night talking about issues which are essentially issues of social justice, about welfare, about how to make people's lives better, about how those who can do for those who can't. And that's something that's really very important, because those people are not going away on the 19th of September. If we get a yes vote, not everybody here is not going to just go back home and leave it up to Alex Salmond. So we've given ourselves, we've created the confidence in ourselves to be able to go out and challenge the politicians, to take politics into our own hands and to do these things ourselves. And I think we do have that power now at the grassroots level, but it also has to come from the top in the Labour movement. And in Scotland we actually do have a slightly better chance at getting a good relationship with the government and the trade unions. What we've got right now is the Scottish Government asking the STUC to sit round with them round the table to look at more progressive employment laws and trade union rights. There is no way that that's going to happen in the UK and the Westminster. And obviously I'm not naive about that process. You know, there's a reason why the Scottish Government are doing that right now, and equally you don't want to see the government and the unions hand in hand. But for that to be happening is a lot better than the Tories Trade Union Reform Committee that they are currently trying to establish, which sees basically the end of trade union rights. We already have the nail in the coffin with trade union rights, but the Tories Trade Union Reform Committee will be the end of it. So these levels of engagement, of empowerment, enfranchisement in Scotland, I think, can ensure that the next generation of the Labour movement won't just be about fighting against wars, fighting against cuts, saying no to this and no to that. It's about actually giving the union movement a purpose again, saying we've got a whole new world to create here, we've got a new country to create, and we've got a country to create that we want to be able to inspire other self-determination campaigns with, other countries with. And that's an extremely important role for the trade unions, I think. It's one that gives them a sense of direction, but it's also one that allows them to rejuvenate themselves with the newly politicised generation that have come about through this referendum campaign. Whether that's young people who have never been involved in politics before, or people that have been re-politicised, re-energised with the referendum campaign. And as long as the unions can recognise the energy that's in the country right now in doing that, and can grasp onto that energy and make a positive case for why trade union collectivism goes hand in hand with building a better, fairer society, I think that voting yes is not only just a vote for independent Scotland, it's a vote for a better, more vibrant Labour movement. And that's the main reason why I and a lot of other trade unionists will be voting yes.
That was terrific. Thanks very much. I'll just pass you straight on to Jonathan now, who's going to speak to us from the Radical Independence campaign.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for the invitation to speak. It's really appreciated. I wanted to start off not by talking about why we should vote yes, actually, but about what's happened so far throughout the referendum process. Now remember that this referendum process is something that a lot of political forces didn't want to see. Not only do they not want a yes vote, they don't want the debate. And we've seen that time and time again whenever there's debates being organised that Better Together don't turn up. And there's a reason that they don't want to turn up, which I'll come on to later. But what have we had so far? What we've had so far, I think, is a historic movement, where right up and down the country, hundreds of people, not just attending public meetings, but getting out there, getting active and speaking to people. But interestingly, being spoken back to. The Radical Independence campaign dedicates its time in these last few weeks and over the last few months to going into areas of low voter turnout. These are areas of strategically placed disengagement. It's no accident that people are disengaged. It's not good enough just to say that people are apathetic. They're alienated from Westminster. They're alienated from the formal political process. We go into these areas, and we've got groups in these areas. And you go around doors, and people say to you, you know, I've not had someone ask me about politics or my political point of view in 10 years. Some haven't even been asked ever in their lifetimes. And there's something wrong there. Now, I want to counterpose that with something. A couple of days ago, I was invited to take part in a debate with Ian Davidson, the Labour MP, and with another Labour MP as well. And it was in Westminster. So I got off the train, got myself to Westminster, and went through the security. And as soon as you go through that security, you feel that you're in a different world. Not just from Scotland, I would add, but from London. As soon as you go through, it's different. And we went to the committee room, and we had our debate. I sat there and thought to myself, this building and what it represents, the people, the majority of them who sit inside it, the consensus politics which we've been bound by for the last 3 decades, the neoliberal consensus, is so far away from the people that we canvass. It's not just far away geographically, philosophically, politically, in every way that you could imagine. It's a million miles away from the lives of ordinary people. So for me, and I think for this movement, one of the most fundamental things about this whole process is democracy and democratic revival. And it's not just about saying that we don't vote for Tory governments and yet we're run by a Tory cabinet. It's about something much more profound. It's about political process. It's about political ideas. It's about people getting active from the bottom up. And that's what we've seen happen. Now, I think we're going to win this referendum. I think that the polls are out of sync with what's happening on the ground. The number of people that are registering to vote, and that's a big part of our campaign, and they're all voting yes. Well, not all. But the point of the matter is, the people who are registering, they're registering for a reason. They want to see political change. And I think that this says something to us about where we go forward over the last number of weeks as we approach the referendum. Because the arguments that are being put against us, this is where I want to say something about the Labour Party. The arguments that are being put against us, I could respect if they were honest. I could respect the arguments of people who held an honest disagreement with our cause. But the arguments being put forward by Labour on the question of independence, on the question of welfare, on the question, if you go back, of the Iraq War, all of them are laced with lies, laced with misinformation, and they are deliberately misplacing their political agenda in order to trick people into voting no. That's the limit of their argument. And I don't think there's any getting around that now. And actually, we have to ask why that is. And there's a reason why it is. It's because it's impossible to offer a coherent, honest defence of Westminster. It's corrupt. It lies to us. Look at the expenses scandal. And look at what it does to people's lives. You know, the richest 200 people in Britain have now got a combined wealth of £318 billion. It's increased by 10 times since 1989. And in the last year alone, their wealth has increased by 15%. At the same time as in the last year, nearly 1 million people relied on emergency food aid. Now, it's classic for a socialist or someone on the left to counterpose the rich and the poor. But what we are seeing now is an intensification of that disparity on historic terms. It's getting worse. Society is going backwards. Now, I think we have to have a positive campaign. And we have had a positive campaign. But we're now getting to the point where we have to be honest with people. When we talk about austerity, we have to understand something about it. The Tories are not implementing the cuts, implementing the process of privatisation, just for their government and their term and their own reasons. It's partly to do with that. But what they're doing is to create decades of permanent austerity, decades of privatisation. They don't just want to decimate the public sector, they want to privatise it completely. As far as I'm concerned, what they've done with the Royal Mail is nothing short of criminal. They have taken from the public purse, they have put it into the back pockets of people who did backdoor deals to make that process happen in the first place. Look at the privatisation of the NHS. Ask the next person that you see from the Labour Party who says, well, we can have the best of both worlds, can't we? Because it's devolved and it won't be affected. Ask them about foundation hospitals. Can we rely on the Labour Party to advocate a defence of the NHS when they are the ones who started? They are the ones who began the entire process of privatising the NHS through the foundation hospitals. We can't. And we're getting now to a point, I think, where if you look at what Westminster's doing, it's not just about economics, but it's about our rights and our civil liberties. When I was in Westminster sitting in that committee room, there were screens on the wall that were telling you about what vote was coming up next. And the vote that was taking place on that night was this bill to make sure that every phone call you make, every email you send, and every company you ever contact is logged, is stored, and is watched. That is a direct assault on our civil liberties. What does Ed Miliband do? He says, we support it. And the whole of the front bench of the Labour Party support it. What happens when the Tory Party say we're going to have a welfare cap? And by the way, the welfare cap is nothing short than one of the most all-out and most brutal assaults that you could imagine on working people. What does the Labour Party do? They support it. They go further. They say they want a cap on benefits for young people. This is the choices that we face. No choice at Westminster or the possibility of change in Scotland. And I think that's what a lot of this vote's about. I was making this point during the debate with the Labour MPs and the Chair interrupted about halfway through my opening remarks. And I was talking about austerity, and I was talking about the cuts, I was talking about the Iraq war and Trident and all of these issues. I said, I'm sorry to stop you, but this is about the referendum and about Scottish independence. And I said, what on earth do you think this is about? Do you think the extra 10 or 20% that's been added to what was seen as a ceiling of support for Scottish independence, which is about 30%, the extra 10 or 20% that we are gaining, have we all turned into Braveheart? No. People can see what's going on. The entire debate is now being refracted through the crisis and the decline of the British establishment. And what happens when establishments decline? Who do they blame? They don't blame themselves. They don't blame other rich and powerful people. They blame the immigrants. They blame people with disabilities. They blame people who can't find work. They rationalise their own failure by displacing their own inadequacy onto others. They divide us. And it's amazing that throughout this entire movement that we've had over the last couple of years, in meetings and town halls all over the place, on demonstrations, going round people's doors, and I'm proud to say it, I have not heard once Scottish jobs for Scottish workers. I have not heard once Scotland for the Scottish, like Gordon Brown said when he said British jobs for British workers. Not a scintilla of that. Instead, in its place, an internationalism. Instead, in its place, a pledge to shut down Dungavel. Instead, in its place, to shut down Trident instead of projecting our imperial power. Now, when you think about these issues, when you think about what's at stake, what have we got to do between now and the referendum to win this damn thing? Because if we don't win this, if it's a no vote, and this is a fear I've got, if it's a no vote, I don't think Ed Miliband's going to win the next election. We have to wake people up to this. I think Ed Miliband is going to lose the next election, and I think it's going to be a Tory government, and it could be worse. Look at what they're saying to Farage. Now, it sounds like I'm scaremongering here, but I'm just being honest about what I think the political trajectory of Britain is. The political trajectory of Britain is austerity, cuts, racism, a rightward moving trajectory, moving away from what people in Scotland want to see for their society. So these are the stakes. And I think that we have to say over these last few weeks, counteract what's going to happen from Westminster by delivering a yes vote. All of the momentum that's been built up through this amazing democratic process, all of the ideas and the diversity of ideas, sure, but all of the ideas that have been built up. All of that will be up for grabs if we get this yes vote. Every single meeting will have counted for something if we get this yes vote. Everyone who's got involved in politics for the first time in their entire life, they're not going to go away from politics. If it's a no vote, they are. If it's a no vote, it will feel demoralising. If there's a no vote, all of this momentum, all of this thirst for social change will not have anywhere to go. And the Labour Party's not going to defend us either. So I think that we've got to be absolutely positive about our message. But I think we've also got to say that now is our time. Now's the time for us to do this. And my last couple of comments on that. See, if we do this, if we get this yes vote, the papers the next day, the media, all of the Better Together campaign, all of the people who have decried this movement, all of the people who said it can't work, all of those forces who want to hold us back from changing the society around us, well, I have much more faith in their opposition. I have much more faith in the people in this room, in the movements that have sprung up. These are the people that can change society. Society has never been changed fundamentally from the top. How did we get the NHS? How did we get rid of slavery? What about the civil rights movement in the United States? I think this movement's in that vein. It's a movement for democracy. It's a movement for social progress. And while there's diversity within that movement, aren't we united on saying that it is unacceptable that we have such levels of poverty? Aren't we united in saying that despite the resources that we've got in this country, every year there being a choice between heating and eating for our older people is an absolute scandal. A scandal. And I'm fed up of cheap words. I'm fed up of cheap words from the Labour Party, from the Tories and from the Lib Dems, who go on Question Time and Newsnight and they say, it's terrible about this poverty, it's terrible that people have to make these choices. And then they finish the interview, they go back to Westminster and they tick away the policies that get them there in the first place. Sick of it. And it's not just us. It's not just us. And I'll end on this. Just one comment about the Radical Independence campaign. Look, what we are trying to do here, what this movement in general is trying to do, is it's trying to say to people that this referendum, and it's an obvious point, but something I think that needs repeated, it's not about any party. You know, for the first time ever, for so many people, they will have the power. Jim Sellers makes this comment, and I think he's absolutely right. On the day of the referendum, sovereignty is in the hands of the people. We have the choice. Are we going to keep it, or are we going to throw it away? Are we going to throw it back to Westminster? And if we pose that with people, if we pose that in a coherent way, going around people's doors at meetings like this, in any way that we possibly can, then we will win this referendum. And very lastly, you know, when I talked about Better Together and talked about the lies that they put out and so on, the misinformation, and there's a lot of it that goes on Twitter and social media, I actually think it's time to end engagement with them on these kind of things. Instead, we have to focus everything that we've possibly got, every last bit of us, in these last few weeks, on promoting our agenda. Let's not just firefight with them all day. No one listens to that. You go into the schemes, you go into the communities, they don't know what any of these people mean or what any of these people are saying. What they do know is that something's got to change. And the only agenda that matches that is ours. The only agenda that matches that feeling in society that something is wrong and that it needs change is a yes vote. And if we go forward in that manner, not only will we win a yes vote, but the day after we will start, very seriously, start to build not just a new society, but a movement capable of bringing about that new society as a result of the process that's taken place over the last couple of years. So we've got to go and do it.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. And thanks again to Sarah. As they were both speaking, and before we move to questions, something kept going through my head. I've got a terrible admission to make, but all I can say is my good friend Gordon Blair, who's in the crowd, is as blameworthy as I am for this. But this is a serious story. governments set tone. And the UK government has set a tone for a long number of years now that everything that could be privatised should be. And that tone filters down to officers in local authorities. The second council meeting that Gordon and I attended as rookie councillors in August 12, we were presented with a paper that privatised the care at home service in Argyll and Bute. Not entirely, but in Dunoon and Cowal and in Bute it was privatised. We were told, and I can remember to this day the words of the council leader, who was then a member of the SNP. He's now palled up with the Lib Dems and the Tories. But he told us that, firstly, the paper was the culmination of 5 years of work. And you might be interested to know that in all of those 5 years, Councillor Walsh, who has chaired a couple of Better Together meetings, was on the Adult Services Committee that led to the paper that we were presented with. 5 years' work. Secondly, he said, this is also the culmination of a very expensive procurement exercise. Our gut feeling was to postpone it. We were told we couldn't, because if we did and we had to run the procurement again, it would cost a fortune. And I know that that day I reluctantly voted that paper through at the council meeting. And I wish I had never done it. And the reason I wish I'd never done it is because not only is the care system poor, but the people who work in it have become impoverished. And I'm ashamed to say it, but Gordon and I spent an evening in, I think, November last year with a number of people who work for the private care companies in one of their houses in Sandbank. And it was crystal clear that the consistent story that we got from them matched the one that I got from a couple of individuals that I'd spoken to, and they're earning, believe it or not, somewhere between £3 and £5 an hour to look after our elderly. Worse than that, they don't get any travel expenses, or if they do, it wouldn't even cover the cost of fuel. And they're dead scared to say anything about this in public because they need their jobs, rotten as they are. And there was one guy said, I work between 80 and 90 hours a week to earn a reasonable wage. I've got to. Now, this thing about tone in governments, officers putting up papers for councillors to approve. And do you know the worst thing about it is? One of the senior officers in the council, who will protect his name for the moment, but he told us, and this will come back and bite him very hard very soon, he told us that he was aware of the employment practices of these companies before they signed the contract. And I said, so why was nothing like that mentioned in the paper that you got us mugs to approve? So, this issue about what we do with our people, looking after people and all the rest of it, and giving people a decent wage for a decent day's work, is part of this whole debate. And I think it's important. I know, and I've told this story that I've just told you to a number of, going back to Conservative voters, they are shocked. They are just shocked. They can't believe that we did that. So, with that little anecdote that kind of touches on the things that both Sarah and Jonathan have said, I'm going to open it for questions. I'll try and be, this is the hardest bit of this, it's really hard, but I'll try and be fair and give everybody the opportunity, not for a speech, but for questions. And Dave Hill's got a roving microphone, so if I pick somebody, I'll point you out and Dave will try and go and give you the microphone. So, who would like to ask a question? Ronnie.
My question is this. I very much agree with the remarks that the chairman has just made. I think it is very clear that power, very often, whether you are talking about Scotland or whether you are talking about Westminster, appears to lie not in the hands of the people that we elect, but in the hands of permanent civil servants. And I think in Dunoon we have had a scandalous demonstration of that. I think one of our speakers tonight was delayed by a ferry service which has been crippled by bureaucrats who have intentionally overruled or misled elected governments of all party colours. So I would ask, how will an independent Scotland ensure that power lies with the people that it elects and not with the apparatchiks? And I think it's well demonstrated by the fact that the Chairman's example related to social care, which is a devolved function and is decided totally in Scotland. So I think if you're talking about democracy, however you divide the nation or nations up, can you tell me how you are going to make sure that it really is the voice of the people and not the voice of the Sir Humphreys?
Thank you for that, Ronnie. I knew that you'd have to get the word ferry in somewhere along the line. Congratulations. So which of the two of you or both of you would like to respond to that?
When you were telling that story there, Michael, actually I thought that was a really, really good example. I work in local government as well, and when I first started there in 2011, I went along to some of the council and cabinet meetings, and I thought that the level of politics was shockingly poor. There was absolutely no debate. The councillors weren't asking the officers any questions about the papers that they'd put up, and it was actually a very, very big shock to me to see that there was nobody in the public gallery along to look at these papers, and some of them were very, very pertinent to people's jobs, to people's local communities, etc. And there was absolutely no accountability to the officers. And I think that actually the independence referendum, this whole campaign, like I said earlier, is about grassroots empowerment. It's about changing the way that things are done, because there is absolutely no point in voting for independence if we just carry on with the same political system that we've already got, with the same way of just voting people in every 4 years, with the same way that local governments run, etc. But what we've got right now is groups like this all over the country on a scale that we've not seen for decades and decades. Now, if we vote yes, people are going to be looking at how to change all of these things and seriously looking at them with a proper purpose, realising that they actually can do something about it, that there is a will to do something about it. So imagine all of you got together and went along to your council meetings or cabinet meetings or whatever, and there'd be 10 times the amount of that than is in this room right now if there's a yes vote, and started actually holding these officers to account to make sure that the people that are elected also have the support of the local community behind them, and giving them the confidence to challenge the officers and the civil servants, etc. Because what normally happens, like Michael said, is that it's the council officer's job to put these papers together for weeks, months, years, and then the councillors get a couple of weeks to read it, consider all the aspects of it, and then vote yes or no, mostly according to what their party leader says. So the question of independence means that all of this is up for grabs. It means that all of this can be renewed because people will have the political will and confidence to do so. But it is up to people to change this. There isn't going to be somebody just coming out of the woodwork, waving a magic wand and changing it. Alex Salmond is not just going to change the way democracy is run in Scotland right now. None of the current politicians are going to do that. It's a hard fact of the matter, but it is up to people to get together, get organised and do that. But voting yes will give people the confidence that they can make that change and renew the whole system that we currently have.
I mean, just a small point. It's not directly related to that, but it's related to the question of democracy and how decisions are made. People know what the revolving door is, whereby someone sitting on a corporate board who also holds or knows people who hold high office, and there's a deal done about a privatisation or whatever else, I mean, that's what's happening in Westminster right now. You know, the people that have privatised the NHS and benefited from that ongoing privatisation process are the same people who are making the laws in the first place. I mean, Westminster is absolutely, I mean, in my view, it's corrupt to the core, actually. I mean, its whole political process. I know that's a strong thing to say, but I can't think of any way any other way to describe it. I think one thing that we should have in Scotland, and I think there's actually moves towards this kind of thing, is that these kind of things, corporate lobbying, corporate power, are not things which are done behind closed doors, but which are transparent, that you can actually go and find out what's happening, and you don't have to go and individually research everything. I think these issues are fantastically important, but it's going to come down to ordinary folk, really, to demand that these things, are actually put in place. And I think the basis for that is the independence movement. People aren't going to want to have done all this work just to revert back to what we've had for the last 3 decades. There's a real spirit of change, I think, that has to be captured in order to implement the sort of things that you're talking about.
Thank you. Okay, next question, please. Gentleman at the back.
Yes. How many times have we heard on television and radio that a yes vote comes along, then that will break up the UK or we'll be put out of the UK? Now, why doesn't the politicians and yourself up there tell the people who don't really understand our cultural history in Scotland, right? But between 1603 and 1707, we had a United Kingdom with 2 states, England and Scotland. In 1707, that changed, that 2 states became 2 nations within a British state. So when we get the yes vote, how the hell are we supposed to believe in the United Kingdom when we're still got a queen at the head of the state? So I'm going to ask you people here, why don't you put that forward? We will not believe in the United Kingdom. We'll be still in the United Kingdom.
Maybe just make a comment about that. First of all, we need to remember that there is such a wide range of opinion that wants to vote yes, that we've got a situation where what we've got in white paper is what the current SNP government think is the best bet. The reality, of course, is that they may very well be wrong on certain aspects of what's in that white paper. Personally, I agree with a lot of it, but what I would say to you is that we've got the perfect opportunity 2 years after the yes vote to vote for whoever we like. And if somebody wants to stand up and make a bigger break with the United Kingdom, then, and if that gets a majority vote, then that's what will happen. It will be within our power to do so. So the yes vote is only the start of the process, as others have said this evening.
I mean, just on that, I mean, you could talk about the Queen, but you could also talk about currency union. You know, you could also talk about the EU, you could talk about NATO and all these kind of issues. I mean, my position on this, and the Radical Independence Campaign position on this very publicly, is that we want a republic. I mean, we think that the royal family and the monarchy is a relic. You know, we want to turn Buckingham Palace into a museum, frankly. But the point is, does that question negate from voting yes? And that's the way I would put it to you. Because even if we accept that a yes vote, okay, it doesn't get rid of the monarchy, right? But does it mean that you shouldn't vote yes on that basis? I don't think it does. I think all politics is a process. Every movement is part of an ongoing process. Does it mean that a party will win in 2016 that gets rid of the monarchy and has a republic? Not necessarily. But the point is, in the here and now, in the decision that we are faced with, what is more likely to bring about that kind of situation? And it seems to me undeniable that it's more likely to bring about that situation if we vote yes. So we've got a clear view on it, we promote it, we publicise it, we want to mobilise around it, but we also say that a yes vote is very much just the start of a much wider process of social change. I don't see how it can be any other way. But that's certainly the attitude that we have on it.
Thank you. That lady up there.
Do you not think that a yes vote is just going to bring about the birth of a smaller version of London and ship it to Edinburgh? We're still going to be a corporatocracy or an oligarchy. We aren't a democracy. I mean, you know, the common people don't have a true say in anything. Or do you think that the yes vote will bring about real democratic change?
My answer is basically what it has been to the last question as well. If you vote no, everything remains the same, but gets worse. Because if you vote no, you're not voting for the status quo. You're voting to rubber stamp everything that Westminster is currently doing, and some. Jonathan's just said that there is a likelihood, a very plausible likelihood, of a Tory UKIP government next year, which is absolutely unbelievable. So the question for me, well, I used to think that voting yes was a progressive step, it was a vote in the right direction, and a no vote was the status quo. Actually, a yes vote is just a vote for the status quo. A no vote is a completely backward step. The thing about the yes vote being a vote for the status quo is, though, that it's a vote for the status quo, but with the opportunity and possibility of changing things. And that change does come from people. So whether it's the question of the Queen, the currency, the EU, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, whatever it might be, those things are currently happening under the UK government, and there's absolutely no chance that they're going to be changing in a way that we want to see them change if we stay with Westminster. The chance is at least there for voting yes, because it means that everybody wakes up the next day on the 19th of September with 2 years to go until there is actually an independent country. But that's 2 years to go out and start actually creating the alternatives you want to see. I think that one of the things that the trade unions would certainly be very involved in is an idea of a sort of civic forum, because the constitution will have to be written, and that's not just about a piece of paper saying that you are now a Scottish citizen. That's a piece of paper that's also potentially going to be able to say that every single person has the right to a house, every single person has the right to free education, to free healthcare. And that's about us coming together and making sure that that question is on the table. The answer is, though, that that question is definitely not on the table from Westminster, no matter what political party it is.
Ian's had his hand up several times.
Yes, I keep going to these things. I'm very much pro-independence for Scotland, as I keep saying. I have to keep reminding people that. I'm hoping for a no vote, because this is not a referendum on independence. The white paper states what we're voting for. We're being asked our opinion, should Scotland be an independent country, but what we're actually voting on is the white paper. And the white paper tells us that we will be under EU rule, we'll be using the currency of a foreign country. None of these things are independence. Now, I'm voting no because it's not good enough. There's too many unanswered questions, and I see it as a huge step away from independence. A question particularly for Jonathan. You talked about what it's like inside Westminster building. Have you been in Brussels? Now, there you see the rich people, the people who are unelected making the rules, and most of our rules are made in Brussels by unelected people. And that is going to get worse if we vote yes, because we won't have the UK opt-outs. We will get into the EU, but not with the conditions that we have at the moment. But why would we want to be in the EU? It's destroyed the Scottish fishing industry, it's destroyed our agriculture, and now the common energy policy promises to tax and destroy our gas and oil industry. Yes, the last time I asked this question, I'm sorry, but the last time I asked this question, Sarah, you gave me an answer that we could just vote to come out of the EU. Perhaps you can explain to the audience the mechanism for doing that, because there's no vote to the Scottish people about whether we want to be ruled by the EU or not, and there'll be no vote on it before the next general election in 2016. Once we're in, it's difficult to come out. Why do you think we will be better ruled by a more remote, more corrupt, more distant and less democratic government than Westminster? And I'm not better together, and I'm not pro-UK.
I mean, On the question of the EU, I mean, actually, I don't completely disagree with you on some of this stuff. I mean, if you look at some of the stuff that the EU is putting through, I mean, for me, the EU is a neoliberal institution that is pro-privatisation, etc., etc., it's pro-austerity. But I will say this, it's not just the EU that's going through a crisis. I think every single major institution in the world right now is going through a crisis. And that's partly because of the global economic crash. It's partly because that is punctuating political tension right across the world. Now, the question, therefore, that we have to ask is, what do we do? We've got a yes or a no vote. Your argument is that you want an independent Scotland. You've got an opportunity to vote yes or no in the referendum, but you're not voting yes on the basis of principle because it's saying, well, you're saying it's not going to be independence, is the point, if we vote yes. Well, I think actually it is an independent. I think actually it is a referendum on independence. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because if we vote yes, we will have the opportunity to put things on the agenda in a much better way. In a much better way than we would under Westminster. I'll tell you something else just lastly. And what I'm not happy about is UKIP being able to dominate the terrain that says we're not in favour of the EU. Actually, if we get an independent Scotland, I'll be part of a movement that says, actually, there's a big problem with the EU, but it's damn well not the immigrants. It's damn well not what UKIP's putting forward. What it is the unelected, unaccountable power. And that's the case for not just the EU, but most governments in the Western world. And it's challenged through a yes vote, I think.
I think the only thing I can add to that is what I said earlier on. A yes vote, you will be able, in 2 years after it, to vote for who you like in an independent Scotland. And if that party wants to get rid of the Queen, wants not to be in the EU, wants to use the groat as its currency, you will have the opportunity to do that. So, you know, I think, with all due respect, Ian, I have some sympathy for some of your views to have told you that, but I think it's entirely illogical to vote no from the stance that you're from. Next question, please. Lady up, right up the back.
I just wanted to pick up on a few of those points that I think what the SNP and the referendum process has done is opened a door for us, and as I think as a relatively young person, I'm quite excited about what's behind that door. I'm aware of the work of the Common Wheel, the National Collective. Now I feel much more informed about the work of the STUC and the Radical Independence Campaign. I think just what you were alluding there to, Mike, about in 2 years' time we can actually vote for who we want. And I don't think people have enough information on that. I don't think they understand that actually the door is opened, but this isn't actually what it needs to look like. You can actually influence that and be part of that. And I think the whole work around the Constitution, I think it's essential that people understand that there's all this work currently going on about how that can look for us, because I think people feel a wee bit scared about, well, actually what's on the other side of that door, and I think we need to be much more proactive about giving people information.
Next question, please. Gentleman there. I'll try and be fair, Ronnie, you know, because the second question about ferries, you know, really.
Michael and panel, I've been involved in this for many years. Since about February, I've become aware of something. I've become aware of the fact that my fellow countrymen and countrywomen are in the process of getting off their knees. And what they're looking for is not a return in a Scottish sense to a political sort of status quo. They're looking for, I put it to you, a completely new system. Do you agree, which is the question?
Yes, is the short answer. There's just something I wanted to say. Is it Ian? Yeah. This is all about opportunity, and I agree with a lot of the things that you've said as well. But the question I would turn back on you is, what are you waiting for? Because all of those things that you're against, all of the things that I'm against as well, like the fact that the EU is a completely unelected technocratic system that's only in the interest of big business and the rich. Nobody in Westminster, if you're voting no, nobody in Westminster is currently talking about reforming the EU or getting out of the EU on a positive basis that isn't about racism. That's the only context that agenda is being set in at the moment. What we have in Scotland is the opportunity to raise these questions along with all the other countries in Europe who are currently being completely desolated basically by Brussels, like Greece, like people in Portugal, like the Basque Country, like Catalonia, like all the self-determination campaigns in the rest of Europe. We've got the chance to stand with those people to talk about a people's Europe and put that in a much more progressive, positive way. And it's not about, this is not the end of history. We're not just talking about, let's all just keep on voting for things. That's not how things changed. People vote with their feet. They vote with their fists in the air. And that's how we'll change the EU or come out of the EU or whatever. This is about people getting off their knees and about standing up to be counted, to change things, no matter what that is. And that does include the EU, I think.
See, when you're saying that people are getting off their knees and they want a completely different society, not just independence, completely agree. But I will say this, it's really easy for us to sit back down again if it's a no vote. I do want to say that, because all of the momentum that's been built up, it's got somewhere to go if it's a yes vote. I think if we get this, and I do think we'll get it, but I think we need focus, and we need to do what you said at the back, in terms of we need to get information out of people, we need to be more coherent, we need to be more active, despite how tired and active we've already been. But if it's no, all of the people that are beginning to stand up, beginning to get switched on, aware and involved and all that sort of thing, it could be problematic. That's why yes is such an opportunity. We've got to make it clear to people, just like you said as well, make it clear about the opportunity that exists here. And at the same time highlight, if we don't get this, the sort of road that we're going to go down.
Try to keep you moving, Dave.
Hi. If this vote is so crucial, and it certainly is, I'm so surprised that no one has yet gone up and asked for a paper ballot. They're only using an electronic ballot and there is no recount. I'd like to know why no one has actually gone out there and actively questioned why this is in place.
Well,
you didn't know that this is an electronic ballot and there is no recount.
Well, it's a paper ballot, but the voting papers will be counted by machine.
Yes, exactly. Yes, so it's electronic.
Well,
yes, it is.
The way it works is that the ballot papers are scanned. Yeah, the ballot papers are scanned. Any of the three of us here can directly answer that, because I'm not sure about the recount position. I agree with you about the method of voting, and any machine does anything can make mistakes. But I'm not sure about the recount. I'll try and find out for you. Okay. Anyone else? This gentleman here, I don't know him at all. Blair Gordon, councillor.
Very much, Chair. Just to pick up on a point that Sarah made when she was sort of collectively referring to the political parties, and as an SNP councillor, I don't categorise the SNP as being the same as Labour, Conservative or Liberal Democrats here in Scotland. And if it hadn't been for the work of Alex Salmond, who is being misaligned on the press every day of the week, we wouldn't be sitting here tonight. So it's not to be, well, I'm flying the flag for the SNP, but it's integral to a wider membership in the SNP who cover the right wing as well as the left wing. And don't you feel that in all of this process, and once we get to Holyrood, with regard to the election after the yes vote, we can fling them out of Holyrood if we want, a lot easier than we can flinging them out of Westminster. And don't you agree with me that when you look at the BBC Parliament programme, and you look at the select committees chaired by Mr Davidson, and you look at the House of Lords, and you look at the behaviour at Prime Minister's questions in the Commons, that's enough evidence for the people in Scotland to realise that we should be getting shot of this bunch completely, and the only way to do that is to vote yes. So I'm just wary of the constant reminder to people we're not voting for the SNP, and we're not voting for the SNP. It's much, much bigger than the SNP. The credit must be given to Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon for taking forward the SNP, which is a democratically elected organisation. And indeed, from an STUC standpoint, the STUC is inherently democratic. So where has it gone wrong with regard to the support of Labour in this campaign?
When I said all the usual political parties, I mean the ones who are currently here, because what I envisage in an independent Scotland is the opportunity to create new political parties. So to break the sort of umbrella parties that currently exist, which the SNP is one of, so is the Labour Party right now. It's an umbrella party at the moment, and create more of the sort of rainbow parliament that Holyrood was supposed to be. The STUC isn't actually aligned to the Labour Party. It's not a union that is affiliated to the Labour Party. What the STUC has been doing around the independence referendum is holding sort of forums around the country called Just Scotland forums to discuss the issues, really. So it's actually not affiliated to any party. And I am obviously not, as you probably gathered, in the SNP. But when I'm speaking to people, and I am making them aware that this isn't a vote for the SNP, because that is a concern for people, I will also tell them that actually Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon are two of the very best politicians that we've got in this country right now. Their strategy, their tactics, the way that they've engaged with the referendum process is second to none in the country right now. But that's not to say that that's actually a good situation to be in, because we should have better politicians. We should have people that are in other parties who can challenge them, etc., because that's what creates a proper democracy. So when I said about, all the parties being the same, what I want to see is a break from 3, 4 different parties sort of controlling Parliament, controlling the local governments, and have a more pluralistic system in that regard.
I mean, I think the SNP do deserve credit for getting us the referendum. I mean, I think anyone who denies that is wrong. But I also think it's worth relaying as well. When we go around to a lot of different places and we're doing canvassing and that sort of thing, particularly in places like Glasgow, I mean, a lot of people do think that this is solely about the SNP, and partly that's because of the way the media's framed it, or the Labour Party's framed it when they say it's Scotland versus Salmond and these kind of things. I think it's vitally important that we have the diversity that we've got, and I know you agree with that. And what's been good about this movement is you can have panels and you can have different people in the audience, but everyone's at liberty to put forward their point of view. We've got a radically different point of view over the question of NATO or the question of the monarchy or these kind of issues. But we're able to promote it, we're able to put it forward, and in doing so you win wider sections of support. And lastly, I think that we have to, and I know this isn't what you're saying, by the way, but I think that we have to say something from the outset of a yes vote, which is opposition to consensus politics. I think ideology is important. I think discussion, argument is important. We've had too much of the wrong consensus from Westminster. I think that what we want to see is a flourishing of debate in Scotland about what sort of society we want and that sort of thing. And I think we'll get that if the yes vote will be a massive platform for that. A huge platform. And the arguments will change. Because suddenly, actually, you're arguing not about whether there should be yes or no, but about how you should implement this, that, or the next policy. And it'll be a hugely exciting time for everyone that's concerned in politics in Scotland. That's what I think we're all aiming for. But within that, we've got disagreements, and we should make them clear, because that's the sort of Scotland that we want to see. You know, diverse, where arguments can be had, and enough of the stale, paralysed consensus from Westminster.
Anyone else want to ask a question? At the front, please, Dave.
Mine's is more simple. I hadn't heard of radical anybody, and to me, radical in my head means you're going to go for it. Why is nobody suing the liars? I know in your opening speech you said we shouldn't debate, just move away from it, go to the positive, and maybe perhaps stop the arguing. But there's so many things and lies and things. The curiosity out in the street is like, why is nobody suing anybody? Why is nobody taking anybody to court? Why do people get away with saying things? I'm not saying it should just be the radicals doing it, but I was kind of hoping that there was going to be some like radical stuff done. I don't know. I don't know why nobody is taking the BBC or somebody when they say things that are blatantly lies. I just don't understand why nobody's. Is that because perhaps it might actually give them just another forum for more people to understand or listen to their lies? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think the point about this, I mean, without getting into a big debate about what radical action is, I mean, from our point of view, it's empowerment of communities, empowerment of workers, it's promoting a radical agenda for social change, which I've tried to outline. But when it comes to the discussion about tactics and about suing people or pulling people up for lying and all that sort of thing, I think that we have to bear in mind that it is a deliberate tactic that they are using. I mean, it's absolutely deliberate. They would far rather we are discussing and that we are firefighting with them about the question of X, Y, or Z. That's what they want, because the more time that they can stop us from going out and putting our agenda to the people, as the weeks tick by, that's all they need to sit and do. Put out this, that, and the next thing, let them react, etc., etc. We need to do something different. Actually, to be honest with you, I think what we should do, and I think this should have happened a few months ago, I think we need to cut the response in two. There should be a group of people, right, to be honest with you, who are doing the stuff around in the media, firefighting what they're saying. But then there's a completely separate group of people, and all they say and all they do is what's our agenda. So we need to stop reacting, is what I'm saying. Stop reacting to the narrative of the Better Together campaign. And we need to start putting forward their own agenda. Wrapped up with that very finally is, see, when people talk about Project Fear, it's important, I think, that we recognise that the reason that Project Fear thinks it's a good tactic is because we live in a society full of fear. We live in a society where people are struggling with their bills, wondering about their jobs, etc., etc. So actually, there's a currency in fear already exists. And that's what Better Together are trying to tap into. So we've got to have a strategy which is putting our own agenda and raising people's confidence. And I don't think that we would do that by constantly firefighting with the opposition. I think the time for that's done. We need to get on, we need to get out with our own agenda.
Thank you.
Yes, it's about the BBC. Why are they not giving any coverage to this campaign? Because they're not giving much coverage at all.
Just one short thing about the BBC. Whenever there's a crisis, the BBC will close ranks with the establishment. You saw it during the miners' strike. You also actually saw it with the London riots. I don't know if people recall a few years ago, where Twitter was ablaze with what's going on in London and analysis and all that sort of thing. You turn on the BBC, there's nothing on it. Whenever there's a crisis for the British establishment, the BBC will close ranks. And I just don't think we should be surprised by this. I think we should be outraged. I think we absolutely should be outraged. I think we should make our feelings known. I've made more than one complaint to the BBC, and after that I feel utterly dissatisfied because I know it doesn't go anywhere. But the way to get back at them, I keep saying this, the way to get back at them is let's go round them. Let's go round the BBC. Let's go directly to the people. See what this is going to come down to in the last month, in the last couple of weeks. It's going to come down to who is stronger in Scotland. Is the grassroots stronger, or is the media stronger? Who is going to influence people more? That's what it's going to come down to. And I think that's the way that we've got to approach it when it comes to the BBC. It is an outrage. It's a complete outrage. But what we have to focus on is, yes, the outrage, and yes, we should hammer them for it. But we should not forget and not take our eye off the ball. We've got a powerful argument, a powerful agenda, and we can take it out to people, and not as a big media corporation who sides with the establishment every time they've got a problem.
There's just one other thing that I would add to that. We've got new types of media coming from all over the place with this referendum campaign. We've got new media, new television channels set up on the internet. We've got National Collective who are using various different methods throughout the arts, whether it's music, art, photography, collages, etc., set up all over the country. And that's part of the media, so it's getting the message out there in different forums, in different formats to people. And it's up to everybody in this room to go and talk to their neighbours, colleagues, their friends, their family, and tell them about all these different other outlets of media that have suddenly become created. Because that's also what the Independence campaign is doing, and what a yes vote would do. It's about opening opportunities for more creativity, for different outlets that people have suddenly thought of that they never thought of before, because they were alienated, because they were disheartened, they were dispirited, and that's all changed. So we've got to promote these different types of media as well. Go and research them yourself and then tell other people about them, because there's actually hundreds out there now that have come up in the past 2 years or so. So forget about the BBC. I would agree with Jonathan. There is absolutely no point in getting worked up about the BBC. We know whose side they're on, whose side they've always been on, and whose side they always will be on. So we just create our own.
Look, we've got somebody from the embryonic Scottish Broadcasting Corporation wants to make a point.
If I can just add to... Thanks. If I can just add to that, what I would say is our motto is don't be angry with the media, become the media.
Any other questions? Okay, Ronnie, we'll give you a second one. On one condition, you know what it is.
2 sentences.
Right. I note that the panel are principally hoping for a Scotland which would adopt what I would describe in old-fashioned terms as a left-of-centre agenda, as opposed to a right-of-centre one, which has been the case in the last few years for the UK. There is, however, a problem, and I'd like to see how you feel you could get round this. Supposing you had an independent Scotland, and supposing it did pursue the kind of social and economic policies that you're envisaging, one effect of Scottish independence would almost certainly be that you would have a perpetual Conservative government in Westminster, because you would not have the 70 Scottish MPs in, well, whatever. You wouldn't have the Scottish MPs to balance that. So you would be in a situation where you were on an island, 9/10 of which was controlled by what we'll crudely describe as a right-wing government, and 1/10 of which by a left-wing government. Now, a huge percentage of our trade in Scotland is with the rest of the UK. Regardless of what actual arrangements you have, the Scottish and English economies will march largely in step. If you had right-wing austerity programs, perhaps extreme right-wing austerity programs in England, the economic effects would swamp Scotland, because we're talking about 90-10, would swamp Scotland and would force a Scottish government to adopt policies for which it was not elected. How would you get round that problem?
I mean, just quickly, a couple of quick points. See, when you talk about Westminster and it'll be a permanent Tory government and that sort of thing, I do have to say, well, we return Labour MPs. But what we ended up with? Tory government, and if it's a Labour government, they're going to do the same damn thing. So that's the first point I'd make. The second thing I'd say is, I mean, we've got a lot of connections with lots and lots of people in England, and they are roaring us on, and they're on the left. You know, these are socialist, trade union members and so on, and they are saying, for the love of God, go and vote yes so that we can give them a slap in the face in Westminster. Because, I mean, if we vote no, it will have a negative effect down there. And I'll just give you one concrete example of this. Forget the radical independence agenda or anything else. The White Paper says they'll renationalise Royal Mail. Right? Now, if we renationalise the Royal Mail in Scotland, and you're at a CWU, that's the Postal Workers Union in England, and you're at a meeting, and the news comes through, Scotland's renationalised the Royal Mail. What do you think they do in the meeting? Do you think they sit there and say, oh, good for them? That's quite good. Right, let's get on with it. What they will do is they will be part of an increasing, intensifying political tension which says, if they can do it, if they can have a fully funded NHS, education system, etc., then why on earth can't we? And actually, if the Labour Party's not going to do it, then we're going to have to think of something else. And that's what's going to happen in England. Very, very lastly, look, we talk about internationalism a lot in this campaign. And I've already said that the Yes campaign's where the internationalist credentials are. But see what's going on in Gaza just now? The atrocities that are going on in Gaza. What does the Scottish Government say? And by the way, I think the Scottish Government could do more, but it says two things so far. One, let's give medical aid to Gaza. To me, that implies they recognise it's not an equal conflict, because they're not giving medical aid to Israel, because they don't need it. And secondly, they're now calling for an independent UN investigation into what happened on the beach yesterday with the 4 young lads. Now, that's important. What does Cameron say? What's the internationalist credentials of Westminster that we're constantly hearing about? Staunch support, quote, staunch support for what Israel's doing. Right? So, when you add all this together, it seems to me obvious what the answer is.
Just quickly, your point about the Labour MPs being voted in, and that will save us from a Conservative, or save Westminster from a Conservative government. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's something like only 2 or 3 times since the last 100 years has the Scottish vote actually counted towards a Labour government. So it doesn't actually affect the outcome of Westminster politics very much. But Jonathan's point is more fundamental. This isn't about a Labour or Conservative government in Westminster. This is about Westminster politics, because it is an establishment in and of itself. It doesn't really matter who's returned there. It is going to be Conservative small c. It's going to be something that is more right-wing than what our ideas in this room certainly are. And for the trade unionists in Scotland, this will be an absolute catalyst for them. This will show them, if we're taking your example where there is some sort of left-wing government in Scotland, or we have more social just laws, etc., that shows them that there is an alternative. It breaks from Maggie Thatcher's propaganda that there is no alternative, that these cuts have to happen and there's nothing we can do about it. That unfortunately the public sector overspent, that unfortunately everybody in the country overspent with their credit cards, and therefore we have to cut. If we can show that 10 miles up the roads over the border in the exact same conditions as the rest of England, not in some sort of other country where manufacturing or infrastructure is different, but somewhere with the exact same conditions, has more progressive policies, has more progressive laws in place and more progressive government in place, that's a catalyst to the rest of the country. They're not going to return an completely right-wing government again, I don't think, because they will be able to see that actually they can break from that Westminster consensus and things can change there as well.
I firmly believe that a yes vote will lead to a resurgence of interest in politics in England and Wales. I think in the poorer regions of England and Wales, and they're significantly poorer, by the way, than Scotland, the North East in particular, then there will be a change. And I don't think a yes vote in Scotland will consign people in England and Wales to a Conservative right-wing vote forever. It may do for a little while, but not in the long term, not even the medium term. Yes, please.
I'd like to know, financially, are we going to stick with debt as, because that's all money is, it's debt, it's fiat, it's made up out of thin air for somebody that wants money. So are we going to have it backed by something real, or is it still going to be make-believe, wishy-washy, Disney really matter, but will land you in trouble?
Well, the day after a yes vote, yes. We're not. But what I would say is this: the US economy used to be underwritten by, as people will know here, the gold standard. Okay, now that doesn't exist anymore. Okay, but my point is, what is now happening in the world economically on a global scale is that it's the US dollar that still underpins it. But what's happening in the US dollar is now it's been challenged. Now, see, when you ask questions about currency and so on, there's something I think important here. Why is it always disconnected from the wider global context? When we talk about currency, when we talk about the issues that you've raised, we have to see ourselves in Scotland as part not just of the UK, but of an international order, of an international community, which is currently going through massive change. And it's about how Scotland reacts to that change. And I think it should be on the basis of building solidarity and mutual trust and so on and so forth. And that's again going to be down to the people in the country after the yes vote.
Thank you. One last question. Have we got one? Hold on a sec. Is there somebody who's not, anybody who's not asked a question yet, first of all? Right, Alistair then. Let Alistair piggyback on it. Quickly.
Sure. We are, as Monty's kind of brought this out, kind of rabbit out the hat, the reason why we have austerity is because we have taken loans from the IMF and the World Bank, which is stipulated that we have to privatise that we have to privatise any publicly owned facility. It's on their own website, and you can follow through on the progress across Africa, across Russia, and how well the World Bank is doing actually in privatisation. Swinney has come out and said that he will borrow, is it what, 6 billion, I believe, to keep, 6.4? 2.4 billion to keep the country afloat, and I cannot imagine where that money is coming from. I hope it's not from the Bank of England. If it is from the World Bank, then we will have to write the contracts and the agreements that will force us into privatisation. So I think it's a very valid question. If we are going to borrow, are we going to borrow on the back of the Scottish people and the nation, or are we going to borrow from a foreign privately owned bank? These questions do have to be answered and hopefully planned for in the 2 years after a yes vote.
We get so much nonsense about the pound and the international exchanges and the currency. Let's face the point that we made earlier. The decision that we will make in September is yes or no in relation to whether we run our own country. The question of the EU, the question of currency, and the question of a whole lot of other factors is something that we will have to sort out later. We will have to make decisions. Now, I've written a wee book on the subject, and it's quite clear from where I stand that we need to move away from the present capitalist system that is operating throughout the world, because it is collapsing. Staying in the pound, when I hear them saying, you can't get into my pound, the pound is a huge debt. It says on the note, I promised to pay the bearer. And they haven't got the wherewithal to pay the bearer. So the whole system is a mess. We will be in the pound at the time when we vote, because we haven't got an option at the moment. we will be in the pound. And the people who are now telling us we can't get in it will be chapping on the door of the Scottish Government begging us to be in the pound. That's what will happen. But what I hope we will do in the period when we are looking at the issues is we will carefully discuss and argue the terms and relationship we will have with, within the UK until we've sorted out our position. Now, the position that I argue, myself and Ronnie Morrison in the book, is you want your own currency. Of course, it will be a fiat currency, as they all are, but it will be one that's fully funded. You know, that's the sort of. Now, I heard a debate the other day on the television. It was Adair Turner, who was one of the people who was supposed to be regulating the banks when the whole thing collapsed. And they were asking him the question about this. And he actually ended up in the discussion saying that he agreed with a fully funded currency of the nature that we are arguing in the book. Of course, it's absolutely impossible to do that in England right now. And I was staggered that he even suggested it. But he didn't suggest it would apply it right now. He said he was moving in that direction. Well, it'll take him 1,000 years to move in that direction because it's not possible in England right at this time because they're so much indebted. But there is an opportunity for Scotland, and we ought to take it when we get a chance.
Thank you, Andy. And I'll just add to that, we'll just remember, everyone, that the other day, David Cameron announced, and his words were more or less this: because of the austerity measures that we've taken, we've found an extra £1 billion to spend on drones. That says it all. Last word to our wonderful broadcaster.
Again, if I can just add to what the gentleman said there, if you look at a Bank of England note now, they've removed the word sterling. So that tells you everything you need to know about sterling.
I'm allowed to have a couple of words now. Basically, today, no, 2 sentences at least. Basically, today, 2 people come into the Yes shop, the wee Yes shop I have along there. Everybody that goes in knows this little couple. They're from Eastbourne in England. They're lovely people, in fact very generous. They fling in crisps and biscuits and money into the jar and all the rest of it. They're hugely enthusiastic. Hugely enthusiastic young people, and they told me something which gave me a bit of pause for concern. They had already told me that at the Link Club they had been told they would lose their DLA if they voted yes. They also told me they would lose their mobility car if they voted yes. Come in today with it. That was what brought them into the Yes shop in the first place, to get some answers about this. Today they came in, they'd been at the church there for a cup of tea and a bun on a Thursday, and they were told, they were asked what they were doing, and they indicated they wouldn't be voting no. And they were then told, they said they came along to the Yes shop for a cup of tea and so on, and they were told, well, of course, we get nothing in Better Together, we have no money, but the SNP government funds the Yes shop in Argyle Street. Now, this really struck at me. We've done over 600 days in that wee shop along there. Every day of it funded by donations and personal commitment of people. We've turned over £10,000 in those 600 days. We've funded leaflets, meetings, car stickers and all the rest of it. And tonight, the same people that come into that wee shop came along tonight with buns and cakes and scones and lovely meringues and so on, and they're all up there still, so I hope we're not going to be left with them. So what we have over here is a bucket. If some of you, it was free, of course. The tea and the buns is all free. But on the road out, and a gesture of support for our wee shop, if maybe you drop a shilling or two into that on the road out to help us continue doing this, to pay for this hall and so on tonight. Okay?
That saved me reminding you about the bucket. So all I need to do now is to thank our two speakers, and I would hope you would join me in a round of applause for Sarah and Jonathan. A special word of thanks for Independence Live. And as Dave said, please take some of the food that's there away. You might as well. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, everyone.
Hot water.